In a universe where alien species evolved without the concept of fear, humanity's horror movie collection becomes an accidental psychological weapon, leading to both hilarious and profound consequences for interstellar relations. The call came at precisely 0300 hours station time, jerking Lieutenant Nyota Kalu awake from her first decent sleep in days. The station's AI projected an urgent message above her bed. Emergency gathering in Xenocultural Chamber 7. Multiple species reporting unprecedented psychological responses. Nyota groaned, already knowing this had something to do with yesterday's cultural exchange disaster. She'd introduced the Veloxi delegation to Earth's entertainment archives, forgetting to engage the content filters. Somehow, they'd stumbled upon humanity's horror movie collection. The Xenocultural Chamber was in chaos when she arrived. Dr. Zixth, the station's lead xenopsychologist, had shifted from their usual crystalline blue to a pulsing ultraviolet, a color Nyota hadn't even known their species could achieve. Around them, various alien diplomats were exhibiting equally unusual behaviors. Lieutenant, Dr. Zixth's voice crackled through their translator. You must explain this immediately. Our species has no biological framework for processing these horror movies, Nyota supplied, watching as a group of nebulons, usually existing as calm gaseous clouds, condensed and uncondensed rapidly in what appeared to be agitation. Yes, why would humans intentionally create simulations designed to trigger emergency survival responses, and then consume them for entertainment? Before Nyota could answer, Ambassador VRX of the Silicon Collective interrupted, their crystalline form vibrating with unprecedented frequencies. The mathematical improbability of these scenarios, the deliberate manipulation of tension through audio-visual stimuli. It's fascinating. Commander Rashid Drake appeared beside her, looking equally amused and concerned. Nyota gestured helplessly at the holoscreen, still playing in the background. Sir, they found our horror movie archive. Apparently, species that evolved without fear responses are having some interesting reactions to their first exposure. As if to prove her point, one of the junior Veloxi researchers suddenly crystallized their outer layer, their species equivalent of fainting. As a jump scare played across the screen, the resulting crystalline formation created patterns that would keep the station's mathematicians busy for months. Interesting, Commander Drake mused, watching as Dr. Zixth began documenting what they termed unprecedented emotional states among their research group. And the emergency meeting? They want more, Nyota said, bringing up the flood of requests filling her inbox. The Hive Mind Collective is offering their quantum physics secrets in exchange for access to something called slasher films. The Silicon Collective wants to establish weekly horror screenings. Even the quantum consciousness of Sector 9 is interested, and they don't even have eyes. Dr. Zixth insisted on organizing what they termed a controlled exposure experiment in the station's largest observation theater. 12 different species gathered to participate in what humans would consider a simple movie night. The nebulons hovered as shimmering clouds near the ceiling, while the crystalline Veloxi arranged themselves in perfect geometric patterns across the front row. Even the quantum consciousness of Sector 9 had manifested, their energy matrix humming with anticipation. Nyota had chosen the others for their first official screening, reasoning that psychological horror might be easier to process than gore. She'd forgotten about the Victorian ghost children. Fascinating. Dr. Zixth's voice crackled through their translator as the first twist unfolded. Their crystalline form had begun refracting light in previously undocumented patterns. The deliberate subversion of perceived reality creates cascading waves of neural destabilization. The nebulons, typically maintaining strict molecular cohesion, began to swirl in complex patterns that the station's physicists would study for years. 3 junior Veloxi researchers simultaneously developed new color frequencies just to express their newfound emotions. But it was the Silicon Collective's reaction that truly made Ambassador VRX, normally communicating through pure mathematical equations, emitted what the universal translator could only interpret as their crystalline structure vibrated at frequencies that briefly interfered with the station's artificial This defies probabilistic logic, they broadcast. The uncertainty, The tension, the mathematically improbable yet narratively inevitable conclusion. Commander Drake found Nyota after the screening, surrounded by frantically scrolling holographic data streams. "Lieutenant," he said, carefully stepping around a Veloxi, who had crystallized in a perfect Fibonacci. "Explain why I am getting requests for emergency processing power from every xenopsychology lab on the station." "They're analyzing the fear response, sir," Nyota replied, watching as Dr. Zixth simultaneously displayed 7 different colors while dictating research. "Apparently, species that evolved without predators never developed what we'd call a fight or flight response. Horror movies are giving them their first taste of recreational fear." "Recreational fear." Drake tested the phrase like someone handling a potentially explosive device. "Yes, sir." "And they're fascinated. The HiveMind Collective is already proposing a joint research. They want to understand why humans deliberately seek out experiences that trigger survival responses. The Silicon Collective is developing new mathematical formulas just to describe the sensation of jump scare." As if to prove her point, Dr. Zixth burst into the room, their crystal facets practically strobing with excitement. "Lieutenant, we must schedule another session immediately. My team has identified 43 new emotional states. Also, the quantum consciousness is offering to share their secrets of dimensional folding in exchange for something called the ring." Commander Drake's eyebrows achieved new heights. "Lieutenant Kalu, are you telling me that human horror movies have become the galaxy's hottest commodity?" "More than that, sir," Nyota said, pulling up the latest station report. "They're calling it Project Frightening Friday. Apparently, experiencing fear in a controlled environment is addictive when you've never felt it before. The Veloxi are already developing specialized crystalline structures just to better appreciate suspense." News spread through the galactic community faster than a quantum wave collapse. Within 2 standard cycles, the Galactic Cultural Archive Station Beta had become the unlikely epicenter of Zixth termed voluntary psychological perturbation studies. In reality, it was just aliens discovering the thrill of being scared. The Veloxi Scientific Academy sent their most distinguished researchers to study the phenomena. They developed specialized crystalline structures designed specifically to experience and record fear responses, their bodies literally reshaping themselves to better appreciate. During a screening of The Silence of the Lambs, an entire delegation simultaneously achieved a new state of matter that briefly confused the station's sense. The Nebulon consciousness, typically maintaining strict molecular cohesion, began experimenting with shape-shifting during scary. Their usual amorphous clouds now formed increasingly elaborate patterns that mimicked horror movie monsters. The station had to issue a special advisory after several humans mistook a group of enthusiastic Nebulons, recreating scenes from The Thing, for an actual emergence. But it was the quantum hive mind of Rigel 7 that took things to an entirely new level. They began analyzing horror movies through their vast neural network, breaking down every jump scare, plot twist, and atmospheric buildup into complex mathematical form. Their preliminary paper, A Quantum Mechanical Analysis of Human Fear Responses in Entertainment Media, became the most downloaded research publication in galactic history. "Lieutenant," Commander Drake said during one of their daily briefings, "did you know we're now receiving diplomatic requests specifically to access our horror movie database?" He pulled up a holographic list that scrolled endlessly. "The Silicon Collective is offering to share their faster-than-light technology in exchange for complete access to something called the Slashers." Nyota nodded, watching as another group of alien researchers hurried past her, their translators buzzing with excited discussions about psychological tension mechanics and narratively induced fear responses. Aliens called the Chamber of Voluntary Perturbation, complete with specialized seating designed to accommodate various species' unique fear response. Dr. Zixth had established a formal research department, the Institute for Human Recreational Fear Study. Their latest paper, The Evolutionary Implications of Deliberate Fear-Seeking Behavior in Human had caused such a stir that 3 previously unknown species had emerged from deep space just to participate in their research. "Did you see the latest development?" Nyota asked, pulling up footage from the previous night's screening. "The Crystalline Collective has developed what they're calling fear facets, specialized geometric patterns that enhance their ability to process horror movie jump scares. During last night's showing of Alien, half the audience literally turned transparent from shock. The station's AI interrupted with an urgent notification. Lieutenant Kalu, the Hive Mind Collective's latest analysis of human horror tropes, has crashed 3 quantum computers. They're requesting additional processing power to complete their study of something called psychological foreshadowing. Commander Drake leaned back in his chair, a bemused expression on his face. You know, when we first made contact with alien life, I expected the biggest challenges to be language barriers or biological incompatibilities. Instead, we're dealing with station-wide requests for zombie movie marathons. Nyota pulled up another report, this one detailing the latest breakthrough from the Nebulon consciousness. They had developed a new form of artistic expression, using their gaseous forms to recreate famous horror movie scenes in 3-dimensional space. Their performance of The Exorcist had been particularly memorable, though the station's maintenance crew was still trying to figure out how to remove ectoplasmic residue from the ventilation system. "Sir," she said, "I think we might have accidentally started a cultural revolution. The quantum consciousness is already talking about producing their own horror movies based on what they call mathematically optimized fear algorithms." Drake's response was interrupted by another station-wide alert. The Veloxi had just discovered psychological thriller movies, and their collective crystallization patterns were creating unprecedented interference with the station's communication systems. The annual Galactic Cultural Exchange Summit was supposed to be a dignified affair, showcasing the finest achievements in interspecies cooperation. Instead, it became known as the Exorcism Incident, an event that would reshape galactic entertainment forever. The trouble began when Dr. Zix, riding high on the success of their fear research program, decided to include a special presentation on human entertainment psychology. They had selected what they believed to be a perfect demonstration piece, The Exorcist. Their only mistake was forgetting to check which version they had downloaded. It was the uncut director's cut. The summit's main hall was packed with representatives from over 300 species, none of which had evolved with natural fear responses. The Crystalline Collective occupied the front rows, their newly developed fear facets gleaming in anticipation. The Nebulon consciousness hovered near the ceiling in elegant molecular formations, while the quantum hive mind manifested as a shimmering field of probability waves. "Distinguished colleagues, Dr. Zixth began, their crystalline form refracting light in academic enthusiasm. Prepare yourselves for a revolutionary exploration of human recreational fear responses." Nyota, sitting in the control booth, realized something was wrong the moment the movie started. "Wait," she whispered to Commander Drake. "That's not the edited version The head-spinning scene began. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. The Crystalline Collective, unprepared for such intensity, underwent spontaneous geometric transformation. Hundreds of perfectly formed dodecahedrons scattered across the floor, each one containing a thoroughly shocked alien in suspended animation. The Nebulon consciousness lost all molecular cohesion, briefly achieving a gaseous state previously thought impossible and setting off every atmospheric contamination alarm in the station. The quantum hivemind's reaction was particularly spectacular. Their attempt to process the scene caused a brief collapse of probability fields throughout the station. For approximately 3.7 seconds, everyone experienced all possible realities simultaneously. The station's AI later reported that in at least one quantum timeline, the entire facility had transformed into a collection of rubber ducks. "Shut it off," Commander Drake ordered, but the chaos was already spreading. The Veloxi delegation, in their panic, had created a crystalline chain reaction that was refracting the movie across every reflective surface in the hall. The hive mind's probability collapse had somehow merged with the projection system, causing the infamous scene to play in 4-dimensional space. Emergency containment protocols activated automatically, but they had been designed for physical disasters, not psychological ones. The safety systems, confused by the unprecedented readings, decided the most logical course of action was to initiate the station's experimental mood stabilization protocols. Calming music began playing through the station's speakers, which only made things worse when it synchronized with the movie's soundtrack. The Nebulon consciousness, attempting to regain composure, accidentally achieved sentience in 3 different spectrums of light. A group of Silicon researchers, Their crystalline forms vibrating with newfound terror, inadvertently discovered a new form of faster-than-light travel while trying to exit the hall. Nyota watched in horror as the situation spiraled further out of control. The station's AI, overwhelmed by the conflicting emergency protocols, began reciting the plot of The Exorcist in what it calculated to be a soothing tone. This triggered a secondary wave of panic among species who had just begun to recover from the first. "Lieutenant," Commander Drake said with remarkable calm, as they watched a group of quantum researchers accidentally phase through a wall in their haste to escape, "I believe we may have underestimated the impact of human horror cinema on unprepared species." Dr. Zixth, the only alien still functioning normally, was ecstatically recording data. "Unprecedented," they exclaimed, cycling through colors faster than the translator could process. The simultaneous triggering of fight-or-flight responses across multiple non-flight-capable species, the spontaneous evolution of new escape mechanisms, the temporary achievement of quantum impossibility states. The Galactic Council's emergency response team arrived to find the main hall transformed into what they would later describe as a dimensional anomaly of concentrated fear responses. It took 3 days to recrystallize all the Veloxi delegates, and the Nebulon consciousness required extensive molecular therapy to regain their standard. The incident report, when finally compiled, was the longest in galactic history. It included 17 new categories of psychological response, and the first ever documented case of a non-organic species developing the need for The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in what the humans would have recognized as barely controlled. The council chamber, normally a model of geometric precision, showed clear signs of recent crystalline transformation of it. Several Veloxi delegates were still occasionally flickering between different mineral states, while the Nebulon representatives maintained careful molecular distance from each other to prevent accidental fear-induced. High Counselor VRX of the Silicon Collective called the session to order, their crystalline form carefully stabilized by what appeared to be quantum dampeners. "We are," they announced, their translator struggling to maintain a steady tone, "to address the unprecedented psychological weapon recently deployed by humanity, recreational terror transmit." Nyota stood before the council, Commander Drake at her side, trying not to notice how the quantum consciousness representatives kept inadvertently phasing through their chairs whenever they remembered scenes from the "Distinguished council members," she began, "I assure you this was not a weapon. It was simply an entertainment format that had unexpected effects on unprepared species." "Unexpected?" A Nebulon delegate vibrated in indignation, their gaseous form briefly spelling out their objection in 17 different languages. "Our preliminary analysis suggests that humans intentionally engineer these experiences to maximize psychological impact. They even have classifications for different types of fear response." The chamber erupted into chaos as Dr. Zixth, still collecting data despite being officially suspended from research duties, projected their latest findings. "Observe," they announced, their excitement causing them to temporarily achieve transparency. "Humans have developed subcategories of recreational fear, jump scares, psychological horror, cosmic dread. They have systematized the inducement of survival response." The Council's AI attempted to maintain order by implementing calming protocols, but unfortunately chose to do so by playing what it thought was soothing background music. The soundtrack from Jaws echoed through the chamber, causing 3 different species to achieve new states. "Order!" High Counselor VRX demanded, their crystalline form resonating with authority. "We must consider the implication. If humans can engineer such powerful psychological responses for entertainment, what else are they capable?" Commander Drake stepped forward, carefully avoiding the patch of floor where a group of quantum researchers had accidentally created a temporal anomaly during their "Council members, if I may suggest an alternative perspective, what you've witnessed isn't a weapon. It's perhaps humanity's greatest achievement in emotional engine." The chamber fell silent, even the Nebulon delegates pausing their molecular anxiety vibrations. "Explain," the High Counselor commanded. "Humans evolved with fear as a survival mechanism," Drake continued. "But instead of being ruled by it, we learned to master it, to explore it in safe conditions, to find catharsis, and even enjoyment in controlled exposure to it. What you experienced wasn't an attack, it was an art form you weren't prepared to appreciate." Dr. Zixth, unable to contain themselves, projected new data streams into the chamber. The commander's analysis aligns with our research. Humans have developed sophisticated psychological frameworks for processing and enjoying fear responses. They've turned a survival mechanism into a form of entertainment. The council chamber buzzed with rapid communications as species that had never known fear before tried to process this concept. The quantum consciousness representatives began calculating the probability matrices of a species deliberately engineering entertainment from survival responses, and briefly achieved enlightenment in 7 different dimensions. High Counselor VRXTX's crystalline form shifted through several contemplative patterns before speaking. Perhaps we have approached this from the wrong angle. Instead of treating this as a security crisis, we should view it as a cultural exchange opportunity. A ripple of surprised agreement moved through the chamber, causing only minor reality distortions. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While the Galactic Council debated regulations and safety protocols, Dr. Zixth made a discovery that would transform interspecies entertainment. They had been reviewing neural patterns from various species' first exposure to horror movies when they noticed something remarkable. The fear responses were evolved. Lieutenant Kalu, they burst into Nyota's office, their crystalline forms shimmering with scientific excitement. "You must see this immediately." Their projection showed complex wave patterns that meant little to Nyota, but had the station's AI humming in what sounded suspiciously like appreciation. "The initial shock response is merely the beginning," Dr. Zixth explained, cycling through colors of academic enthusiasm. As species experience more horror entertainment, they develop sophisticated neural frameworks for processing and even anticipating fear responses. They're learning to enjoy the anticipation. The evidence was everywhere once they knew where to look. The Nebulon consciousness had begun organizing what they called atmospheric appreciation sessions, deliberately modulating their gaseous forms to enhance the viewing experience. The Silicon Collective had developed specialized crystalline structures that amplified tension during suspenseful scenes, creating what they termed optimal fear resonance pattern. Commander Drake found them in the station's main theater, now transformed into a multi-species horror appreciation center. He said, watching as a group of quantum researchers used probability manipulation to create 4-dimensional jump scares. "I believe we've stumbled onto something unprecedented." The Hive Mind Collective had taken things further, integrating horror movie storytelling techniques into their neural network. Their first attempt at creating their own horror entertainment, the quantum uncertainty that came to dinner, became an instant hit across 17 star systems. Despite being largely incomprehensible to organic beings, even the Veloxi, who had initially been most disturbed by human horror, had developed a unique appreciation for the. They discovered that their crystalline forms could create complex light patterns during scary scenes, enhancing the viewing experience for other species. Their synchronized crystallization during key moments added what Zixth called an extra dimension of communal fear appreciation. "It's not just entertainment anymore," Nyota realized, watching as various species gathered for the station's first Interstellar Horror Film Festival. They're creating entirely new forms of artistic expression. The festival's highlight was the premiere of The Silent Nebula, the first horror movie created through true interspecies collaboration. The Nebulon's atmospheric effects combined with Veloxi light crystallization patterns, while the quantum consciousness provided probability-based plot twists that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Humans contributed traditional storytelling elements and jump scares, creating something entirely new in galactic entertainment. Dr. Zixth's paper, The Evolution of Recreational Fear, a new paradigm in interspecies entertainment, would later be credited with establishing fear appreciation as a legitimate field of study. But more importantly, it marked the moment when the galaxy's species began to truly understand each other's emotional landscape. "Perhaps," Commander Drake mused, watching as a Veloxi critic crystallized into a perfect dodecahedron of appreciation during a particularly effective skit. "This is what First Contact was always meant to be. Not just sharing technology or resources, but sharing the ways we experience the universe." One standard year after the Exorcist incident, the Galactic Cultural Archive Station Beta hosted the first annual Interstellar Horror Film Award. The station's main theater, now permanently modified to accommodate various species' fear appreciation methods, was packed with beings who had once never known the concept of recreational. Lieutenant Nyota Kalu sat in the control booth, watching as Dr. Zykst, now the galaxy's foremost expert in xenological fear studies, opened their crystalline form had evolved specialized facets specifically for public speaking about horror entertainment, creating subtle light patterns that enhanced the atmospheric tension of their present. In one short year, Dr. Zykst announced, their translator modulated for dramatic effect, we have witnessed the birth of an entirely new form of interspecies. What began as a shocking discovery has evolved into something beautiful and terrifying, often simultaneous. The nominees for Best Interspecies Horror Experience included works that would have been impossible to imagine just a year. The Nebulon Consciousnesses, Whispers in the Void, featured synchronized gas form choreography that created four-dimensional terror effects. The Silicon Collective's Crystalline Echoes used resonating fear frequencies to induce controlled anxiety responses across multiple species simultaneously. But the night's winner was a collaborative piece called Quantum Nightmares in Nebula Space, which combined traditional human horror storytelling with Veloxi light crystallization patterns, Nebulon atmospheric effects, and probability manipulation by the quantum conscious. The acceptance speech existed in 3 dimensions simultaneously and briefly caused everyone in the audience to experience all possible versions of their lives. But the critics agreed it was. Commander Drake joined Nyota in the booth, carrying his traditional, most dangerous species in the room mug, now a popular collector's item across 17 star systems. Did you ever imagine, he asked, watching as a group of Veloxi critics demonstrated their new technique of fear-based crystalline art appreciation, that human horror movies would become the galaxy's hottest export? Better than that, Nyota replied, pulling up the latest cultural exchange statistics. Look at these numbers. Interspecies understanding has increased by 300% since we started sharing our horror entertainment. Turns out, learning to appreciate each other's fear responses creates pretty strong bonds. The station's AI interrupted with an update. The latest horror appreciation technology, developed jointly by human and alien engineers, had just been approved for galaxy-wide distribution. The Universal Fear Enhancer allowed species with different sensory systems to fully experience horror entertainment designed for other species. The quantum consciousness was particularly excited about finally being able to properly appreciate human jumps. Dr. Zykst's closing speech summed up the transformation perfectly. We began this journey believing fear was a primitive survival response, they said, their crystalline form displaying every color they had developed for experiencing horror. Instead, we discovered it was a gateway to understanding the complex emotional landscapes of different species. Through sharing our fears, we have learned to better appreciate our diverse ways of experiencing the universe. As the ceremony concluded with a special screening of The Thing, now enhanced with Nebulon atmospheric effects and quantum probability fluctuations, Nyota couldn't help but smile. In teaching aliens to appreciate fear, humanity had accidentally created something fearlessly new, true interstellar entertainment.